The more you defend yourself, the weaker you look. Every extra word you spoke was proof you didn't believe in yourself. People who try to defend themselves, they talk too much when challenged. Their voice and body show nervousness. They look for approval after explaining. They defend themselves even when no one asked for it. And then, they change their story to match the listener's mood. In the realm of human interaction, small behaviors often reveal more about a person's strength or fragility than their most carefully prepared statements. 3 patterns in particular form a subtle but damaging cycle. Each may appear harmless on the surface, yet when examined through Carl Jung's psychological lens and Niccolò Machiavelli's view of power, they emerge as clear signs of insecurity that quietly undermine authority. The constant need for approval is more than a simple desire to be liked. Psychologically, it points to a lack of a stable, internal measure of self-worth. A person with this trait depends on the reactions of others to feel secure, as if the image they present, their persona, will collapse without regular reinforcement. Jung would see this as a sign that the individual's self-image is fragile and overly dependent on social validation. This dependence creates a dangerous vulnerability in any environment where influence and control matter. Machiavelli's perspective makes the risk sharper. A person who seeks approval becomes predictable. Those around them quickly learn that agreement and praise can shape their decisions, granting others a quiet but powerful form of control. Instead of leading, such individuals find themselves subtly led. The second behavior, defending without being asked, reveals a deeper layer of insecurity. This pattern grows from an assumption that criticism is inevitable. The person, anticipating attack, rushes to justify actions before anyone has challenged them. Jung's concept of the shadow helps explain why. Unresolved insecurities, past failures, or hidden fears sit in the unconscious, waiting to be exposed. When these hidden parts remain unacknowledged, the person acts preemptively to protect them. Machiavelli would judge this as a tactical blunder. By offering a defense where none was demanded, the individual plants doubts that might never have existed. Instead of neutralizing threats, they create them, providing critics with material to exploit and shifting the conversation's control to others. The third trait, changing the story to match the listener's mood, damages credibility more than many realize. On the surface, this seems like adaptability, but in reality, it signals that the persona has overtaken the authentic self. The person adapts excessively to external reactions, sacrificing consistency for short-term acceptance. Jung would see this as a loss of individuality. The self becomes whatever is most acceptable to the immediate audience. In Machiavellian terms, the cost is steep. Power depends heavily on trust in one's stability. When explanations shift to please the listener, it becomes clear that principles are flexible, perhaps dangerously so. This makes the person appear unreliable, a figure who can be swayed under pressure and whose commitments are fragile. Explaining oneself at length in response to a challenge or a question reduces standing because each explanation hands control of the conversation to the questioner, and the act of justification signals that the speaker feels exposed and in need of validation rather than confident and settled. Even in politics, the political effectiveness depends on control of appearances more than on the truth behind those appearances. And a public that sees a leader scrambling to explain will treat that person as weaker and easier to push. This dynamic applies in social life as well as in politics, because reputation and perceived strength shape others' expectations and actions. The unconscious contains elements that the conscious mind prefers not to show, and the defensive explanation often reveals those elements through tone, over-detail, and agitation. The hidden content that emerges in this way tends to invite projection from listeners so that others read the defender's fear or insecurity into the situation and respond to that perceived weakness rather than to the original issue. Carl Jung described a public mask that a person wears to meet others and to play social roles. And that mask gains credibility through steady, predictable behavior, while it loses credibility when the wearer begins to over-explain or to smooth every doubt with a long account, because each long account highlights the gap between the mask and the private life beneath it, and therefore invites scrutiny instead of closing the matter. A careful conversational strategy therefore rests on 3 linked moves, all of which require self-control and a clear sense of aims. The first move consists of recognizing when a question functions as a test rather than as a neutral request. The second move consists of refusing the frame that the test builds by answering only what is necessary to reassert priorities. And the third move consists of shifting the interaction toward forward-looking statements of purpose and behavior rather than toward long defenses about the past, because forward motion restores perception of competence, while repeated backward-looking explanations sustain doubt. When people feel attacked or challenged, their nervous system triggers a fight-or-flight response that often produces an overwhelming urge to defend themselves. This natural reaction activates mental processes aimed at explaining and justifying actions or decisions. However, these defensive explanations usually come with subtle signs of nervousness. These signs include hurried speech, repeated details, changes in tone, and a need to fill silence. All of these clues indicate stress and insecurity. Instead of calming the situation, these signs signal weakness to listeners. The more someone tries to justify themselves under pressure, the more the audience senses doubt and vulnerability. The defensive response, therefore, undermines its own purpose. Jung introduced the idea of projection, a psychological mechanism where individuals unconsciously attribute their own unwanted feelings, fears, or insecurities onto others. When a person faces criticism and responds with detailed justifications, they unintentionally reveal emotions they would rather hide. Listeners pick up on these emotional signals and may project their own doubts or fears onto the person defending themselves. This projection causes the audience to believe that the defender shares the same uncertainties or motives as the critic. In other words, the act of defending invites the listener to see the defender as guilty or flawed, regardless of the actual facts. This dynamic makes the situation worse rather than better, trapping the defender in a negative cycle. Machiavelli emphasized the importance of reputation as a form of power and protection in public life. He argued that people respond more to appearances than to private truths. When a person responds aggressively or defensively to criticism, observers often assume that the person has something to hide. This assumption erodes trust and respect. Instead of strengthening their position, the defender's reputation weakens, because the public views the defense as a sign of guilt or uncertainty. Machiavelli advised leaders to avoid appearing defensive under any circumstances, since defending accepts the opponent's frame and gives them the upper hand. He suggested that the best defense is often silence or a brief, well-chosen statement that deflects attention without inviting further inquiry. Carl Jung's psychological insights provide a deeper understanding of why controlled speech strengthens self-possession. According to Jung, the conscious mind projects an image of the self to the outside world, while the unconscious contains aspects of the personality that remain hidden and often contradictory. When an individual speaks excessively to explain or defend, they inadvertently allow these hidden parts to emerge through hesitations, contradictions, or emotional shifts in tone, undermining the intended message. Controlled speech reflects an inner equilibrium. It signals that the speaker possesses mastery over their thoughts and emotions and does not feel compelled to respond to every challenge. This control reassures observers that the speaker's persona is authentic and integrated rather than fractured by insecurity. Thus, deliberate brevity in speech acts as a manifestation of psychological stability and strength. The mastery of speech discipline involves more than simply speaking less. It requires understanding how to frame responses so that they serve to redirect the focus away from personal vulnerability and toward one's intentions and capabilities. Machiavelli's teachings stress that when confronted with accusations or doubts, the most effective leaders do not engage in reactive defense, but instead respond with measured statements that acknowledge only what is necessary, followed swiftly by actions that demonstrate competence. This approach denies adversaries the chance to seize the narrative and compels them to address facts and behavior rather than speculation and emotional arguments. For example, a manager who answers a question about a project delay with a concise explanation and immediately outlines a clear plan for resolution projects confidence and authority far more effectively than one who attempts to justify every detail and excuse. The psychological benefit of controlled speech also lies in its effect on the speaker's own mental state. When a person speaks impulsively to defend themselves, they often escalate internal stress and anxiety, which reinforces feelings of vulnerability and helplessness. In contrast, adopting a disciplined approach to speech requires cultivating awareness of one's emotional triggers and practicing restraint, which gradually builds resilience and self-confidence. This process aligns with Jung's concept of individuation, where a person gradually integrates different aspects of the self into a cohesive whole, enabling them to face social challenges without feeling threatened. Over time, the habit of measured speech transforms the individual's relationship to conflict from one of reactive defense to one of calm control and purposeful engagement. The practical application of these principles involves learning how to craft responses that are not only brief but strategically designed to reclaim narrative control. The speaker must anticipate potential challenges and prepare statements that clarify positions without opening the door to further interrogation. This preparation includes using language that establishes boundaries clearly, such as stating what is under one's control and what is not, and focusing conversation on future steps rather than past errors. Machiavelli's advice to maintain a strong reputation by careful self-presentation underscores the importance of aligning speech with consistent, visible action. Words alone do not secure respect unless backed by credible deeds. Another critical element of controlled speech is the use of silence as a tool. Silence can create discomfort in interlocutors who expect immediate responses, causing them to reveal more of their own position or to reconsider their challenge. Jung identified silence as a powerful communication form that allows the unconscious mind to process stimuli without rushing to judgment. Using silence strategically in conversations signals that the speaker is neither rushed nor unsettled, reinforcing the impression of inner strength. Far from being passive, well-timed silence functions as an active form of control that shapes the flow and tone of interaction. The mastery of controlled speech is not simply a skill for leaders or public figures. It applies equally in everyday interactions such as workplace discussions, friendships, and family dynamics. Individuals who learn to regulate their verbal responses gain an advantage by preventing unnecessary exposure of weakness and by directing attention toward their chosen agenda. This discipline reduces the risk of escalating conflicts and fosters an environment where mutual respect can develop because communication shifts from emotional defense to rational exchange. However, achieving this level of control requires ongoing self-reflection and practice, as human instinct often drives the impulse to explain and defend. Building inner authority represents the essential foundational process that frees a person from the compulsive need to explain and defend themselves repeatedly. And this process demands conscious effort to develop psychological strength and clarity of purpose that do not depend on external validation. Carl Jung's psychological model highlights the importance of integrating unconscious aspects of the self, known as the shadow, in order to create a stable and authentic identity that remains unaffected by outside judgments or attacks. Therefore, the first step in building inner authority involves honest self-reflection and acceptance of all facets of personality, even those that seem imperfect or undesirable, because this acceptance reduces internal conflict and creates a secure center from which responses can arise calmly rather than defensively. The political thinker Machiavelli, concerned with power and influence, emphasized that true leadership depends on appearing strong, regardless of internal fluctuations. But he also implicitly recognized that such appearance rests on real strength. In practical terms, this means that the person who wants to avoid the weakness revealed by constant explanation must cultivate confidence grounded in competence and in a clear understanding of one's values and goals. Without this foundation, attempts to hold composure and control in conversation become superficial and fragile, prone to collapse when challenged more aggressively or unexpectedly. Machiavelli's advice to rulers to anticipate attacks and to prepare measured, strategic responses aligns closely with the psychological necessity to develop a sense of control over one's emotions and reactions, allowing a person to maintain direction without getting sidetracked by anxiety or shame. Thus, inner authority involves both preparation and ongoing self-mastery, which together create resilience. In practical terms, developing this kind of inner strength involves consistent practices such as setting clear personal boundaries, engaging in regular self-reflection, and building competence in areas of responsibility. Each success in these domains reinforces a sense of self that does not rely on external approval, which gradually breaks the pattern of reactive explanation. The individual learns to trust their judgment and to accept that misunderstanding or criticism may occur without threatening their overall identity or mission. Furthermore, this trust in oneself enables the person to speak less and with more impact because words are chosen not to defend, but to affirm direction and to inspire confidence in others. Please like this video and share your thoughts with us in the comment section.